I mean, your comment now that the government is now making children learn remotely again for non-health reasons. Just run us through some of those non-health reasons that schools are becoming.
Okay, so, after schools reopened in March 2022 with compulsory masking, but reopened anyway, we have had a particular situation here in Peru. Remote learning was an emergency response in the context of the global pandemic. Unfortunately, our authorities have decided that remote learning is now an option to respond to other situations, in particular to governance-related situations. I'm going to provide examples. There's something in Spanish, in Peru, we call it paros. It's when you have a sort of, strike type of thing. For example, when you say paro de transportistas, it's when, for example, people that work as drivers, in transport companies, they decide not to go out to work. So you don't have, public transportation available. Okay, that's a typical situation of paro. I don't know the exact word in English for
strike?
That. It's kind of a strike, because you have manifestation, but it's when they, stop to protest as a means of protest,
I'm with you. Yeah.
So, for example, we have had that type of situation, for example, recent protests related to the insecurity in the cities. We have had a rise in criminality, which is, of course, a legit, reason to protest. But what is happening? The government, whenever they faced that type of situation, they would say, okay, for the sake of security, we're going to put mandatory remote learning. And just to give you an example, because we did have that type of situation in 2022, 2023. For example, we even once, this is going to sound very, very, strange, but I remember once, was back in 2022, Peru was in the finals for Qatar 2020. Remember the World Cup, and we had this match with Australia. Our government decided to declare a public holiday and remote learning for the sake of a soccer match that, by the way, we lost. But just to provide you an exotic example, but going back to the governance-related examples, whenever, for example, there was a situation that compromised security from the government's lens, they would declare, this state of emergency. That's something that happened, for example, here in Lima on April the 5th, 2022. Just less than 3 weeks, 4 weeks that the children were already back into face-to-face education, our government decided to declare state of emergency for unknown security reasons. And as you may imagine, the reaction from citizens was really hard. People did not take it, and they had to go back and reopen the system. But they imposed an educational lockdown for a day. And again, with no further evidence. But what I want when everyone that is following this to think about is the legacy of COVID decision making, because that was possible to make because people in the government thought that was a reasonable way to solve, in a way, governance situation, Okay, moving forward, the movie, what has happened this year? And this is Lucy, you will be impressed. Since late September until late October, in the capital city of Lima, where you have 10 million people and approximately 2.5 million students, Lima and Callao, which is like the port, okay? The government declared compulsory remote learning for the whole educational system in 4 different dates. What was the excuse? Strikes, security reasons. So this happened in late September, in mid-October, and again in late October. 4 days within a month in which the Peruvian government decided that given security reasons, they were going to impose mandatory remote education for the whole educational system up to universities. Okay? So, not only that, we recently host APEC, the Asian Pacific Economic Conference, very important occasion. We had President Biden, President Xi, among other figures, visiting Lima. And this is not the first time Peru organizes these conferences. And of course, it's a source of national pride that our country is, welcoming leaders from across the world for these important economic conversations. So because of that conference, we already knew that there were a couple of days that they were going to declare holidays because, there was the days where, the presidents were going to be in town. They had to, to facilitate for this event. And I mean, this is something that they have done before. So there were no surprises. What was really outrageous was that out of the blue, the government decided to cancel face-to-face education, to close the whole educational system 3 days before that, from Monday to Wednesday, and then you had like the 2 holidays for APEC, Thursday, Friday. And what was the reason why they decided to close the whole educational system again in Lima, the port of Callao, and the city of Boral for 3 days? You wouldn't believe this, Lucy. The public explanation was that, it's too much traffic. So we need to, in a way, given the traffic and given security and given the possibility of protest, it is better to close everything. It's going to be safer. We even had the Minister of Education on public TV saying that it was a great occasion for family reunification. So, parents could spend time with their children. And, for me, it was just a blatant example of the harmful consequences of COVID-19 policies. I mean, how on earth a country and a government system decided that you can just, as easy as that, shut education.
The disconnect between the government and the actual, the people that it is serving. There are, as you say, people that will need to go to work. They won't be able to earn money to put food on the table. How do they have this public holiday and spend time with their families? There are a whole host of reasons, apart from children not going to school and missing education. Has there been protests about that?
Oh, yes, of course. Once again, Volvamos a Clases Peru, this civil society group, when we learn about, this news, we organized a protest outside the Ministry of Education, and there was a whole of media attention. And I mean, the positive side of this is that, several sectors of society, from the private sector to the educational sector, university representatives, school representatives, they all expressed, the disagreement for these measures, because, you cannot run a school calendar with this level of uncertainty. Whatever reason you may like to use to justify this decision, it is not sustainable. We're close to the end of the academic year, and what is, more from my perspective, outrageous, is that they're using any excuse to justify this.
Why do you think they are doing that? Why?
Well, I wrote in an opinion column. I have a Diario El Comercio, it's a major newspaper here in Peru, that the government is using school closures as an easy fix for wider governance problems. So, okay, you have a transportation strike, close schools, close universities. You have a major political event happening in the city, but okay, instead of just closing the system in the central zone, let's just close it a week, because it's an easy fix. Because before COVID, Why did this not happen? Because you had to reschedule classes. That's logistically complicated. You have to tell people to recover classes in a different time. It's too complicated to do. Remote learning reduces the political cost of making these decisions. And apart from that, and this was widely documented by our national media, and I'm really thankful to journalists from different news sources that they actually, what happened? They went to the shanty towns. They went to different areas of the city to actually document what was really happening with the theoretical remote learning. And then you could see what happened during the COVID years. Children did not have ways to follow their education. Children, were or left alone, or they had to share a mobile phone with the brothers and sisters, all very, with a lot of precarity. And again, as you rightly frame, Lucy, reflect a profound disconnection from decision making with what was actually happened at the ground with families and children. And once again, you have children paying a high price for problems that they did not create.
Do you think that the rule makers are fine? They have their gardens, they have their kind of comfortable homes, and they can, get their food. Do you think that that means that unless they really look and really think or really care, they're not going to see the impact of these policies and these measures on the most vulnerable and the poorest groups? I mean, they seem to be just ignoring that. It's the rule makers it's a kind of a feudal system we had in this country. You have the people making the rules for the poorer people to take the risk that they don't have to take, and to carry on. But do you think that there's why do you think there's a disconnect, and why do you think they're not frightened of protests?
Well, I think it's because they have lost the plot. I mean, education is an essential service, as essential as health. For some reason, in this country, our policy-making system decided that is not a priority as other services. And I know, some people will say, but look, we have not closed the system. We're providing the remote service. What are you complaining about? And that takes us to a second question. Who has decided that remote learning is a viable option for educational provision? I mean, that's not expressing our laws. That is not expressed in the way the social contract has been established in this country. So I think, and it's interesting because I mean, of course, this was, ministries and decision makers were in the media. And I remember the prime minister saying, but why, there's so much complaint? I mean, we learned during the COVID years to be flexible, to be resilient. Why are we complaining? It's like, okay, once again, I mean, whatever happened in the COVID years, what were COVID years? Emergency. I mean, we can further analyze that. But we don't have COVID now. We don't have a pandemic. We don't have a health situation. So why is remote learning being used as a response to governance problems? And I would say, and I would argue, that there is also a political rationale behind this. Okay, we have a government with a low acceptance rate. I mean, university students, political force everywhere. You want them behind the screens, following classes in Zoom at home, instead of being on campus, having a debate. I think...
You mean it's a form of control?
Yes, there's a form of control. And I think, some sectors of our decision makers are happy with this authoritarian policy-making style, For example, the government got we call it Decreto Supremo, is like the decree in which they decided to close, for 3 days, the educational system before this major APEC conference. They published that on a Friday, and the educational lockdown was beginning on the Monday. I mean, just to in a way, like explain for an international audience how ridiculous is this. In other countries, they wouldn't be able to do this. People wouldn't take it.
And the protests and the sort of reaction to the government, have they responded to the negative reaction to that? Do they justify it? Is there any explanation?
Oh, of course, they have justified. They have called people like me, that we're exaggerating, that we have to build on the lessons of the pandemic and things like that. But again, I think the media has done a wonderful job documenting the reality of remote learning in this country. And the good thing is that the educational community has spoken, through different means about the unsustainability of this type of measures. I mean, you cannot keep closing educational systems because of governance problems. If you have a riot, if you have a strike, if you have whatever security concerns, respond to it. Make, territorial responses. You don't have to shut down the educational system, affecting in Lima, Callao, and the Distrito Federal 2.5 million students only in primary and secondary education. We're not including in that figure university sector.
Awful.